Simple, classic, traditional, however you want to say it, some games don't rock the boat too much. At first glance, anyway. Of course, reinventing the wheel is no good if the end result is neither fun nor engaging. Point is, sometimes it's good to go back to our roots. This is Guard Duty from Sick Chicken Studios, kickstarted in 2017 and now available on Steam for Windows, Mac and Linux. I actually had the pleasure of talking to the developer at AdventureX 2018, in case you think that'll influence my opinion at all. Alright, enough preamble, on to the story. The year, 2074. The place, not important. The time, 10 seconds to human extinction apparently. A gruff-sounding bloke has a casual conversation with a techno-demon about how wonderful the world once was or wasn't. They're not seeing eye to eye on that one. Before the man can end the conversation via having a firearm diplomacy, a big green explosion takes them out, along with a chunk of the building they were in, and then cuts the goddamn planet in half. Anyway, forget all that for now, because we're going back 1,000 years to the kingdom of Wrinklewood. A guard sits getting hopelessly drunk on his birthday, whilst on duty. Oh dear. The goat looks happy though. A cloaked figure approaches the gate and shows a lot more interest in the local princess than one probably should when breaking the ice. Needless to say, there's more than a mild implication that the guard should not let this fella in, but the criteria for entry was never made clear, so in he comes. Also, the guard's off his face, that might be a contributing factor. Next day, the guard, who we'll call Tombert, for that's his name, wakes up to a loud and thumpy royal summons. After a series of rather silly events, he finds his missing uniform, greets the king, and the king greets. The princess is being kidnapped, you see, by a strangely familiar looking cloak enthusiast. Tombert pledges himself to venturing forth and saving her, possibly for personal glory, possibly due to a Napoleon complex, possibly just to get the king to stop crying, but also because he knows that the royal knights, who've been dispatched already, are a bunch of absolute fannies, so he might as well try himself. Now, normally I don't venture into playable parts of the game when describing the story, but it takes a while for us to get to the central thrust of the plot. Everything from Tombert waking up onwards is a playable section, the aforementioned series of rather silly events. It's a technique that's often used to break up the introduction, so the player isn't sitting there doing nothing for a full 5 minutes. That first look at the lobby in Day of the Tentacle is a more well-known example of this. These sections mostly take the form of a wee tutorial. This game goes a bit further. Sure, it'll get you used to the inventory bag and the to-do list, but there's actual gameplay here, object inventory puzzles and dialogue. Oh, and you'll be seeing some rather long stretches of said dialogue before you leave the starting town. This doesn't last too long, at least until you reach... well, we'll get to that later. On to gameplay talk we go. 2-button interface, left click does the things, right click describes the things. Inventory is a pop-up screen accessed by this magic bag of magic, and you can double click exits to warp through them. Yay! Assuming there's no small obstacles you need to hop over first. Those pop up once or twice and you'll need to cross them in order to be able to warp to an exit on the other side. Lovely animation to it though, and that's something which, despite this being a visual medium and something you can judge for yourself, is worth noting. At least in context, because this game is primarily the work of one guy. If you're wondering why this will be the sole mention of the game's 3 to 4 hour length, that's why. You can decide for yourself if that's worth £7.19 or not. The range of animation for the characters to the backgrounds to the cutscenes is certainly a step above what we're used to, and damned if it doesn't add a certain level of charm to proceedings. And it's nice to see someone have affection and skill at drawing in this older art style as opposed to, well, everyone else is doing it. Now, it's not a spoiler to say that the game has both past and future sections. That's in the description and the trailer, so not much of a secret. How those two are connected, however, is very much in spoiler territory, so don't expect anything on that front. What I did find curious was how the game changes when we go to the future. The most obvious difference is the contrast of idyllic medieval fantasy land of lush greenery and fantastic beasts against oppressive cyberpunk dystopia where a tyrant rules with an iron fist, or several fists, steel fists, or some kind of metal. He has a robot army is what I'm saying. The character you play in the future is naturally on the me no like this side of things, and he's not the only one. Right away you're introduced to his support team in a blatant homage to Metal Gear Solid. Not the first reference this game makes, and not the last either. These folk will do much the same tasks as they did in the game this idea came from. Offer advice, hints, light conversation. About the only thing missing is them saving the game for you. This isn't a one-off gimmick either, you can call them anytime you're not busy. And if you haven't guessed, this is where some of the conversations can get a bit lengthy once more. Not a criticism, but I figure it'll be worth noting for some people. What really stuck out to me, however, is that instead of the big sack of infinite items you've gotten used to already, your inventory is displayed at all times, and their use is entirely contextual. Just click on a hotspot, and if you can use one of your items there, you will. Aside from being able to call your team or examine items, the inventory might as well be read-only. Or examine-only, you get what I mean. A curious change to make at roughly the halfway mark. Perhaps a comment on how adventure game interfaces have become vastly simplified in modern times? Yeah, probably not. More likely it was to contrast with the more traditional influences shown in the first half, as opposed to things like robot guards and interactive computer terminals, and hang on a minute, that skull looks familiar. Yeah, you might remember me covering a little game called Bitstream a few years back. Same guy. Took me way too long to figure that out. Before I digress from influences entirely, there's a few that spring to mind. The humour and initial plot are quite reminiscent of Blazing Dragons, with the young man goes to save the princess whilst getting all the supposedly competent knights out of trouble premise, whilst it's Discworld that seemed to have its fingertips on the setting and art style, thankfully not so much on the puzzle design. This also means you can get out your regional English accent bingo cards, because they cover a fair few here. They seem to have stopped short of attempting any Scottish, Irish or Welsh accents though, and given how rarely those go well, I'm fine with that, he says as if he could spot a bad Welsh accent in the first place. Anyway, what I feel we have here is a game which has one foot firmly planted in the past, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. It's trying to keep a hold of the good things from games past, the games that led us to where we are now. A lot of games attempt this by either rote copying or throwing in whatever token references to classic titles they can think of. This game is not denying its influences by any means, but it's also trying to do things differently at the same time. In my very first review on this channel, I said that if you're going to try something new, you have to get the fundamentals right first. I believe Guard Duty has done this, from the expansion on a typical rescue the princess plot, outright lampshading that trope at points, to the simple quality of life improvements that have seeped into adventure games over the years, to basically including a whole other setting within the game with different gameplay mechanics to boot. And whilst I originally thought some of the post-ending text was a bit of a sappy note for a light-hearted game to end on, I think it's clear from the previous few sentences that it's had some kind of effect on me. Now, saying that I was moved by the efforts of one man to finally make the game he loves isn't enough on its own to say that a game is actually worth playing. This is still your time and money we're talking about. I just thought it was an interesting observation. That said, I absolutely do think this is worth playing. I got my money's worth on this one. Of course, I would have had a free key for it if I'd waited an hour, but that's on me. I may not have found it laugh out loud funny, humour being as subjective as it is, but it was definitely light-hearted, charming, campy at times, and overall entertaining. Plus the good little good boy was so cute. Look at him. Look at his face.
I think he likes me. He's adorable, so fluffy. I'll leave him be. These sure look like they're worth a few bob. Verumin's worth more to me than all the gems in the world. So close now.